We truly believe that systemic coaching is the future. And what we today see as being practiced 80% of the time as individual one-on-one coaching is going to shift very rapidly.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining in from. I'm Kiva from Kocharya, and lovely to have you all here today for our Future of Coaching webinar with Ram and Cindy. So today we're going to be exploring systemic team coaching in organizations. And before we get into the details and I hand over to Cindy and Ram, I want to just take a couple of minutes of your time to just share with you what we have in store for you all in the next few weeks. So, must have received our email today. We have a bunch of really exciting courses planned up. So, as you must have read as well, one of the things that we are really proud of at Kocharya and we think is something unique to our program is the fact that our coaching foundation and advanced courses have specializations. So that means we focus on a particular niche, let's say, for example, organizational coaching or mindfulness or ontology, neurolinguistic programming, something specific along with the larger core of building your foundation in advanced with the requirements of the accreditation programs. So coming up, we have Organizational Coaching Foundation on February 20th. We have another coaching foundation, which is going to focus on life coaching, meditation, and mindfulness on 7th March. We have a new program, ACTC, starting with on 9th March with Cindy and Ram. And I think today they'll touch upon certain core components of that as well. For people who are looking for advanced coaching, we have one focus on ontology that's coming up in February. And we also have a short program that Ram is going to be facilitating on yoga coaching for wellness. So something different that we're bringing your way, and look out for all the updates from us. Going to just take the next 30 seconds to also let you know that next week we actually have 2 webinars planned up. So we have our regular Wednesday webinar where we're going to have our alum Beth Perilla join in. And on Thursday, that's 16th February, we have a Hero's Journey series with our alumnus Avril, and she's going to be bringing in different speakers to this series. So please note that you need to register separately for the Hero's Journey webinar. I'll also post the link for you all on the chat box right after this. But do register, and we hope to see you all for these 2 webinars as well. So welcome again, and I'm going to pause and welcome Cindy and Ram and request them to please take over.
Thank you, Kiva. And hi, everyone. Lovely to be with all of you. Ram?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm muted. Okay. Am I? No, I'm not. Okay.
No, you're not. Okay.
Yeah.
So Ram and I are going to go into dialogue on systemic team coaching. And as we do that, we encourage you to raise questions or discussion points on the chat that we could engage more with you and your needs or your growth or learning around systemic team coaching. We're going to today do it from or talk from an organizational point of view. But as we talk through it, you will also get a sense that systemic team coaching is a very integrative process. It includes the team, the organization, rippling into own communities. And it's a highly integrative process that flows, and as it flows, has an impact, a positive impact around multiple layers. I'll stop there and check with Ram if there's anything he wants to say to frame today's session.
Yeah. All that I would like to start with, I mean, we'll go into details of what we are going to talk about, what systemic coaching is, what the benefits are, and why at this point in time it's going to be important for many of you as coaches to be trained as well as be certified and eventually credentialed by ICF in what's currently called the team coaching, which is in many senses leading to a systemic coaching approach. It's just that we truly believe that systemic coaching is the future. And what we today see as being practiced 80% of the time as individual one-on-one coaching is going to shift very rapidly to a focus on teamwork, a focus on a larger systemic approach for reasons we can discuss later. And you can always question us saying that we are talking rubbish. So why do you think individual coaching is most important? But first of all, I just would like to say systemic coaching doesn't mean that individuals are excluded. It just means that there is going to be a focus on individuals, but at the same time, there is going to be a focus on individuals in respect of the kind of people that they impact and who impact them, and therefore the immediate kind of penumbra, as it were, of the work community and the family and the larger ones and so on. So there's no end to the system. So yeah, we will address it in different ways. I think Cindy will sort of lead the way into what are the different areas of systemic work that we would like to focus on today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry, I was talking to Kiva who put a link up. So now let's start with this very simple, question around why systemic. For years it's been the focus on executives getting coached or the top layer, the selected few getting coached in organizations. And then for a few years now, with a lot of research and top leaders in the field of systemic coaching, we've seen this explode. And we've seen the ripple effect on organizations. There are many studies or case studies to demonstrate that. But let's you and I explore why systemic, why team coaching?
You're asking me, Cindy?
Yeah.
Okay.
You start and I'll add.
Okay.
Why systemic?
Well, yeah. Let me be, as usual, be a little bit controversial. Okay. I think when coaching started as an independent profession, probably, I don't know, the earliest may have been about 20, 25 years ago when Thomas Leonard started and he founded ICF, and parallelly in Europe, the two Davids founded EMCC and so on. That was pretty much the beginning of what you might call as coaching today, and people like John Whitmore, Tim Galloway, and others wrote a lot about this and made it far more powerful, effective, generative. I think in many ways, though we today try and separate it a lot from therapy, mentoring, and stuff like that, I think the origins of coaching were pretty much founded in some ways with therapy, counseling, mentoring, and so on. In fact, even today, I think being a person, Carl Rogers, is probably the seminal document as far as coaching is concerned. Though it was written about counseling, he was the president of the American Society of Psychologists. There is, of course, there are differences. There are also fundamental differences in terms of how we approach people, moving from the telling to the asking and past to the future and all that kind of a stuff. But this is how it began. And so it started pretty much as an individual work. And so coaching also evolved as an individual one-on-one work, and people got comfortable with that. And over time, my belief is that many people, especially those in HR who sort of evolved into coaches and psychologists, into counselors and all these kind of things, they found it easier to do the individual work, then apply the same principles of awareness creation to larger groups of people. And I know I'm touching a raw nerve here, but I have talked to many people, experienced coaches, who have told me, I'm not comfortable working with teams. I'm okay if I'm doing training because that is vertical. But if I have to work horizontal, yeah, I can do some facilitation work. I can stand there and then get them to sort of this thing. But coaching, evoking awareness, it's complicated, it's complex, because it requires peripheral listening. It requires multiple kind of, putting patterns together and stuff like that. So I think one of the fundamental reasons why coaching remained pretty much individual is because of the preference of coaches, that they would prefer to coach individually rather than groups of people. Now, we can do a survey, and I'm very sure people are honest with themselves, they will admit this. Okay. And then there are people who tell me, oh, what is so great about systemic? I can always use a systemic approach with individuals. I can make them think about the larger space of people who impact them and who they impact and so on and so forth, and I can get the same amount of value out of it. And I beg to differ. The reason I beg to differ is soon after about 4 odd years of my becoming a coach, having gone through my earlier avatars of corporate chief, CEO, founder of companies, and then a spiritual path, trying to become a sannyasi, a fake one at that for a while. When I took up coaching and became a coach for the first 3-4 years, that's all I knew, because that's what I was taught. The competencies were about individuals, the teaching was about individuals, so I did that. And the more and more I did it, I found that while I was able to transform people, surely, making aggressive people less aggressive and so on and so forth, toxic people less toxic, but the impact on the organization as a result of that transformation in the individuals, I could not see. I tried to, being an engineer by profession, a bit analytical, I was trying to keep track of what was happening to these people. And I found in several cases, these people reverted back to the original behavior because the system around them did not encourage a new behavior. They still considered them the same, irrespective of whatever changes that have happened inside. The new behavior was not either fully anchored or it was not fully accepted or whatever it was. And then there were people who changed and they found this very irritating, so they left the company. So either there was regression or resignation. And it was sad because companies paid a lot of money for these things. And so I started asking companies a question: are you measuring the organizational effectiveness as a result of coaching? And what is it that you're getting? And there were fake ROI measures which have been put up by various people. They are totally fake news because they're all derived and there is nothing right about them. Most of the companies were honest. They said, no. There's some who did, yeah, we do something, but we aren't able to establish that. And then I got an opportunity where there was a company I was coaching 10 people at a time, high potential, bright, brilliant people. And they were engaged in a particular project, which I was asked to sort of have an oversight on, but not coach them on. And the sponsor turned to me and asked, hey, what's the progress after about 3 months? I said, yeah, individually, they're making tremendous progress, but on the kind of project that you have set, they don't seem to be making any progress because the little that I inquired about them, they are not doing anything. So when we talked about it, one of the things that came up was, he asked me for suggestions. I said, look, if you give me an opportunity, I don't know, I have never tried it before, but I know that I have tried it when I was working as a CEO and corporate leader. I would always get the team together in a retreat kind of a setting, and we bash our brains. I won't let them get out of there, won't even let them out for lunch till we found a solution to the problem. Maybe that's not coaching, but let me try that. Okay. So this is what we did. We got the 10 people out in a room for 3 days. I worked with them individually and collectively. And 3 months later, that guy turned around and said, "What kind of a miracle have you wrought?" I said, "No, I didn't make any miracles, but if you think something has happened, it's happened as a result of getting the people together and getting them to talk amongst themselves and sort this out." And that is when the epiphany happened, as it were, the Holy Grail, whatever. And I tried it with a few more companies. And this was much before EMCC announced its team coaching competencies and much, much, much before ICF announced its team coaching competency. This was somewhere around 2014. And I was trying to sell this to companies and they wouldn't buy, period. Because there are 5 people. And I said, "Look, I'll coach all of you together. And it'll cost you probably not 1/5 of the cost because there'll be individual coaching involved, but it'll certainly be half the cost of what you otherwise would be spending. And you'll be working as a team and you will probably develop as a team as well." Oh, I said, no, we would like to be coached individually. So then I started asking a few people and that got really very, very bad negative results. So if you guys are really saying that you are working together, and if you don't want to be coached together, how the hell are you going to work together? They didn't want to talk to me again. So it took a long time. What really changed, somewhat fortunately, one of the good effects of the pandemic was something happened with the companies. And they were willing to do anything to get some results. Worker disengagement, all that kind of stuff, work from home kind of a thing, the depression and the great resignation, whatever you want to call it. And they said, "Okay, if you have any solutions." I said, "I don't have a solution, but I have some possibilities that you might like to consider." So we started doing teamwork and we converted teamwork into coaching, though we didn't call it that. Okay. They want to call it anything. We are okay with it. Group training, group coaching, group facilitation, whatever you want to call it. But the people who trained them, including myself and a few other selected people, they started working with the whole basis of coaching in terms of creating awareness within those groups. And they were phenomenally successful. So we have done several such courses now. So I'll wrap this up very, very simply. Those of you who haven't read, please do read something called the Project Aristotle, which is a study conducted by Google several years ago. And it lists 5 factors which contribute to high performance. One is psychological safety, another one is called interdependability. And then there are 3 factors in terms of goals, in terms of meta goals, in terms of specific attributes measured, and then in terms of the benefits, in terms of reward systems and so on and so forth. We can show to any company that if they adopt a systemic approach to coaching, and if they say this is what the end result would be, we would help them to set measurable goals and we will achieve those. And this in the process will also help build teams, which they are not paying for. They are paying for results. And one of the greatest results that they will get is they will build collaborative teams and it'll cost them less bucks. They will get more bang for the dollar than they would be otherwise paying. So there couldn't be a better deal than this, but it's still uphill battle. Many companies we still talk to, they say, "Oh, no, we don't know. We haven't heard about this systemic coaching." All the coaches we talk to, they tell us they will do individual coaching. That is because they're not confident of doing systemic coaching. It's as simple as that. So I would like to be absolutely upfront, and I know that many people here may not like to hear this. So one of the reasons why you should all get familiar with team coaching and probably get the credential that ICF is offering now and the program that we are offering now is really that in the longer term, this is how the companies are going to, because they are going to be able to build teams. It is going to cost less. And thirdly, they would be able to have ROI measures in terms of actually seeing how the results pan out. Over to you, Cindy.
Absolutely. To all our participants, I'd like to hear from you. How many of you do team coaching? Please indicate onto the chat on the chat box. How many of you engage with team coaching? That's a very vital point you raised, Ram. It was a few years ago. Personally, I did team coaching in 2010. Thrown, said yes, very enthusiastic to coaching quite a few high-powered teams, and then went a bit crazy trying to find information on how to do the coaching because I felt inadequate. And of course, I learned mostly on the job, coaching and learning, and coaching and learning, you know, what shows up best. And I think even you alluded to that when you said you get all the people in the room for 3 days and they showed up different to the point where somebody asked you, what magic did you do? So there's something that happens there when people get together. There's some kind of bonding and this and internal factors that show up with external value heads or return on investment, as you called it. So what are those internal pieces that happen? What do you think they are when people get together in a room, a team, and do some kind of work together? What do you think, coaches? What happens when people do that? Participants. What was it for you, Ram, that showed up in that case study you described?
Yeah. And somebody referred it to here. I think it's a beautiful way of expressing it. It's like, not that I'm a musician, I'm an appreciator of music, but one of our dear friends, John, used to say this because he plays a sax and he plays in the choir and all that stuff. He used to say that coaching, especially groups of people, is like jazz. You have multiple voices, you have multiple instruments, they're all coming together and they have to be structured, and you are really a conductor there. And you're not playing, but you're not a mute witness, but you're doing something out there which enables those notes not to remain discordant, but they become harmonious somehow. But the trouble is, invariably, whenever you start with a group, the notes are often discordant. There is a lot of conflict there. So the fundamental difference that I found between a group and a team, and that is what we need to differentiate. Very often when people say, I do team coaching, they are talking about group coaching, and that's somewhat different. And that is what somebody referred to as this, whether I sense a difference here or the structure is difference. The fundamental difference that I noticed was groups had to be emotionally involved with one another and with the larger space of the project that they are working on, the cause for which they are working. And that is what Project Aristotle calls a psychologically safe place with interdependability. They really bond together. And that takes time. You might call that coaching, but that is preparatory to the coaching. Because you need to bring, if there are 12 people in the room, you have to get those 12 people to meld into one single entity. And that's really a challenge. But there are simple ways of doing it. Some of the things that I let them do is, talk about what are the great things that you have done in your life? What are the challenges that you had in your life? How are they going to help you in this particular space and so on? And I still remember my son and Pranam and I, we used to there were much more receptivity of doing that in the United States at that point in time when we started Kocharya in Chicago. And we worked with quite a few groups of people, especially NGOs. This was more on a pro bono basis or marginal cost basis. And they used to ask him, Pranav, what do we need to prepare ourselves and bring? He said, bring lots of boxes of tissues because people are going to cry. And they surely do, because they get emotional. So a group of 12 people would take you almost about a day, sometimes more, sometimes less, during which time they open up. And there are multiple different notes which come up there. And eventually, gradually, those notes come together and they form a melody. And that's the simplest way that I can describe it as a kind of a metaphor.
Yeah. I also found the the trust and empathy level really increases. You have no choice but to listen to your teammates. And it's in that listening that bonds get much more stronger, as in empathy for other. And then there's a more common understanding of, so we have this new awareness now, we bonded as a team, how can we achieve the growth measures that we want to? So I found that empathy and trust was quite a significant aspect. And I see participants on the chat is also saying similar. And I like what you said, Ram, because that's how teams are seen as an entity. It's not, each one of them on their own or subgroups forming. When you're coaching a team, it is all together, one entity. And coaches, if you have not, have a look at the team coaching competencies, and you can see the mapping of the core competencies and the team coaching competencies, and those skill sets like empathy, trust, presence, active listening, how significant they are to the growth, development, and success of high-performing teams. We'll do that in another webinar, but today we're going to talk generally about systemic team coaching. And then it's not just there, Ram. It's like when they go back to the workplace, or if they are doing team coaching on site away from work, when they arrive back, they have a bigger sense or a more significant sense of the organization's purpose, vision, and where the team belongs within the larger picture.
In this particular space and so on. And I still remember my son and Pranam and I, we used to do, there were much more receptivity of doing that in the United States at that point in time when we started Kocharia in Chicago. And we worked with quite a few groups of people, especially NGOs. This was more on a pro bono basis. And they used to ask him, Pranav, what do we need to prepare ourselves and bring? He said, bring lots of boxes of tissues because people are going to cry. And they surely do, because they get emotional. So a group of 12 people would take you almost about a day, sometimes more, sometimes less, during which time they open up. And there are multiple different notes which come up there. And eventually, gradually, those notes come together and they form a melody. And that's the simplest way that I can describe it as a kind of a metaphor.
Yeah. I also found the trust and empathy level really increases. You have no choice but to listen to your teammates. And it's in that listening that bonds get much more stronger, as in empathy for other. And then there's a more common understanding of, so we have this new awareness now, we bonded as a team, how can we achieve the growth measures that we want to? So I found that empathy and trust was quite a significant aspect. And I see participants on the chat is also saying similar. And I like what you said, Ram, because that's how teams are seen as an entity. It's not, each one of them on their own or subgroups forming. When you're coaching a team, it is all together, one entity. And coaches, if you have not, have a look at the team coaching competencies, and you can see the mapping of the core competencies and the team coaching competencies, and those skill sets like empathy, trust, presence, active listening, how significant they are to the growth, development, and success of high-performing teams. We'll do that in another webinar, but today we're going to talk generally about systemic team coaching. And then it's not just there, Ram. It's like when they go back to the workplace, or if they are doing team coaching on site away from work, when they arrive back, they have a bigger sense or a more significant sense of the organization's purpose, vision, and where the team belongs within the larger picture.
Sorry, was that a question?
Yeah, I was reflecting on it myself. Do you want to have that?
Okay. Yeah. Look.
Yeah, because in comparison to individual coaching, that doesn't necessarily have to have that impact.
Yeah. Okay. And there is a question I think Kiva has put on. I'll try and address that as well, Cindy. See, first of all,
Yeah.
I can only talk about my experience, okay? And also work that I've done with Peter Hawkins, who's an acknowledged guru in this space, and David as well. These are people who have been doing work on team and systemic work for a long, long time. And it was for me an amazing gift, as it were, when I found out what they were doing and started interacting with them. Now, first of all, as you said, the common saying is that if you have 12 people coming together, there are 13 when you take a team, because the 13th entity is a team, and that's a separate entity. So in some ways, I think it was a question from Meenakshi, how do I remain equally empathetic to each of the individuals? And I mean, you can't, analytically, mathematically say that, okay, I'll divide my attention between 12 people. That's impossible. In a group, some people are going to be more upfront. Some people are going to be dissenters. So it all depends upon the dynamics of the group, what is going to happen, what's happening out there. So usually, at least the stance that I adopt, a couple of them. One, if there is an issue that is coming up, I would throw it back into the team and say, hey, what do you think about it? This person has said this. You know him well. So what is really happening out here? And usually you'll find there's an answer that is emanating from the team, that all that then the two coaches is doing is to create a collective awareness and put that together and summarize. But at the same time, the coach has to be, in a sense, the coach has to have something like a fly's lens. And I don't know how many of you know this, that a fly has two eyes and each eye has about 6,000 lenses. So a fly has over 10,000 lenses. So we don't have that, but still we have the ability to peripherally look at things. And therefore you need to keep a watch out for what people are doing, whether somebody is fiddling with his mobile phone or somebody is working surreptitiously on laptop, even though that is banned in the room and stuff like that. And you have to bring certain order into the group. And one of the things that always I make it a rule, that anything that you say will have to be appreciative to the other person. And if you're going to be critical or toxic, I'll throw you out of the room. And I have thrown them out of the room. I've thrown a CEO of a company out of the room when he made a nasty remark about another person. And he apologized before he could come back. So as a coach, you have to be pretty tough. So it may not be quite the empathy that you're looking for, but empathy in the right sense, meaning, are you able to put yourself in the shoes of that other person? And so here you are putting yourself not only in the shoes of each one, if they express, not all of them may express, but you have to put your shoes in the total team as well. So what helps, to be honest, is to have some kind of a climate survey done beforehand. And I found it to be extremely useful. So I know the views of the people. And very often before I take the teamwork, I do that survey and I talk to the individuals to understand a little bit about where they are coming from in terms of what the organizational goals are before I embark on it, where the CEO outlines the vision and we start that. Another thing that I noticed over a period of time, many people I knew who were doing so-called team coaching, if someone is disagreeable and they dissent or whatever, they would ignore them, hoping that they would go away. Of course, they won't go away. But I found, if they are, very often the CEOs are present in the groups that I work with because of it's a CXO plus CEO kind of group. And I've had cases where people have turned around and accused one of the founders that whatever that person is doing is inimical to the collaborative nature of the company that is aiming for. But it got resolved. So it really depends upon how you allow this to flow. And much depends upon, and you said something about how, what can I do to evoke? You don't have to do anything to evoke awareness. I mean, if a coach is trying to evoke awareness and the coach is not doing his or her job, the awareness evokes itself by the process that you adopt, by the process that you are allowing them to adopt. So unlike in individual coaching, which is why team coaching is often easier, because you can always sort of bring it about in a way that one person in the group questions another person. So you need not be necessarily the explorer, the inquirer. So once you have started that basis, asking him, okay, this person has said this. Now, what do you think about it? Would you like to inquire and explore into what this person is saying? So then they pick it up and they start doing it. Then they're actually doing your job for you. So it becomes much simpler. And in the process, there is something else that is developing out there. I don't know if I mean, this is not something that I can explain to you in words and say, hey, this is the picture that I draw. You have to actually experience it. Okay. But it's worth experiencing when you start working with it. Many of you might have seen in family environments. And there's a beautiful concept of what is called the family constellations, which is by this person, the German guy, I don't remember now. John Whittington later wrote a book on systemic constellations, how you physically so put it into some positions and do that. And very often I do that with teams, asking them to assume positions, different kinds of people, different stakeholders. And one of the other major things which I have not mentioned so far, which is very, very important in team coaching, is to bring as many as possible of stakeholder views. That is, stakeholders could be the leaders in the company, the investors in the company, the clients, the staff. It could be other people outside, the vendors. It could be the larger community which could be involved. Whoever else that the company, that team impacts and who are impacted by the team. Cindy, there is, Sai has asked a question. I've always tried to wonder, why should one conduct team-based coaching, because in a corporate context, the relationships are created superficially. Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right. Look, partly because, I don't know, maybe I was lucky. I got my spurs, as it were, working with Hindustan Lever, where even today, if I meet someone, whether he's been in that company or at that time when I worked or not, it's like family meeting together. We had a culture where, of course, we were fiercely competitive. And it was one of the most high-performing companies and groups that you could. I stopped learning the day I left Levers. So there, however, everywhere that I worked, I knew the families of everyone that I worked around with. I knew the names of the children. So one of the first things that I asked when I would start working with a team, to ask them to tell me, do you know the names of the wives of these people, other people? Do you know the names of the children? There hasn't been a single company where they did. Maybe they knew one person, other, but certainly not the team who have worked together for years together. Okay. So ultimately in team coaching, one of the, let's say, unstated effects that as a team coach, at least I would like to create, is can I bond them together in such a way that they would do that? They would get emotionally connected, not only just with one another superficially, but knowing what their families are. They really get involved with the other person. And psychologically, you might have so many other factors, but Google study shows that dependability, interdependability is extremely important. And you can't draw a boundary there, that only this much of dependability, not more than this.
So Ram, from what you were saying in this question around that, the survey that you're talking about upfront is one of the tools you could use that would be similar to a chemistry check except this is more complex because you're now inclusive of all stakeholders and those that impact the team.
Yeah, there are some powerful tools. In India, I've talked about it many times. There's one that I use called EUM Lens. You can look it up. Ashok, who developed that, is a very good friend of mine. Shabri, who runs a company, she's a coach from us. I've used that in a few cases. There are some very expensive versions out there in the market, internationally known, and they will tell you what is the cultural thermometer, as it were, whether it is toxic or they use the word entropy and so on and so forth. But UMO have found to be amazingly good. It measures a larger organizational climate as well as the individual's viewpoint. So you get reports on how the individuals are looking at the organization and the larger picture of the organization itself. And I found it extremely useful. So if you do but sure, there are other places where I haven't done that survey. Okay, so the work was a little bit more. But whatever you do, but please remember, team coaching is never going to be one of these fake laser coaching sessions. So everybody talks about laser coaching, 20 minutes. Of course, any idiot can evoke awareness in 20 minutes. But is that awareness going to be translated into an anchored shift in habit? That can never happen, because Neuroscience 101 tells you it takes 3 to 6 months before the neural networks change and a new habit is formed. And therefore, you have to be added consistently, persistently for 6 to 9 months. So any team coaching work that you undertake, don't do for less than 9 months. I would usually specify 12 months. Initially, they might be about 2 days equivalent or 3 days sometimes of team building, envisioning, and so on. We have a beautiful process called SPEED, which we presented at the Appreciative Inquiry Conference in Johannesburg several years ago and got some kind of appreciation for it. And that process is on the blog. You can adopt that in terms of team setting, then envisioning, discovering the obstacles, and then designing action plans, and finally individual commitment to those, what we need to do. And that process would take initially a couple of days, 2 to 3 days perhaps, and then 12 monthly meetings of about 4 hours each, and a commitment from individuals in the group to follow this up in terms of a dashboard. And the coach comes then, works with them to see what the progress is and keeps them accountable. So there's a lot more effort. And somebody asked here, what do you do with the shy guys? You have to try and get them into opening up. What is that they are shy about? So after a while, it takes some time. It takes about a couple of hours before you get into the stage. I don't know how many of you are familiar with lab work. All teamwork, all systemic work is based on OD. Kurt Lewin, NTL, and some of you who are familiar with that kind of stuff. ISABs in India, Sumidas, and maybe similar ones outside India. It's in a way similar, but different in the sense it's more directive, whereas in lab work, it's not directive. But in the same way that it happens in a lab work, if you've ever been in one, I have been in one, and I don't want to go back there again. It was a bit of a torture, 5 days going through that space. It's not easy. Now, if a person doesn't open up after a certain time, unlike in a lab which goes on for 5 days, here you can't afford that time. It has to be done within about 8 hours, 12 hours, or whatever it may be. So you've got to accelerate it in some ways, but still the basic theories of that apply. You try and figure out who's not opening up. So can you get them to open up to the extent that you can? You can't change their fundamental nature. So then you make a note of it and then try and get some individual time with them separately. So that is where the systemic work has both individual work and teamwork coming together. So you have to have agreement with the organization, the CEO, the team leader, that look, I cannot predict how long it's going to take for certain individuals, but if there are individuals with whom we have to work more deeply, then we would need that kind of time as well.
Absolutely. So participants are getting a sense that you could use tools and techniques, models throughout the various processes of the team coaching. meaning upfront, pre-designing the coaching initiative. While you're in the early stages of creating agreements, including with the shy guy. You can have agreements with him as to how he would like to show up during this team coaching process. And of course, for work around new thinking, new feelings, evoking awareness, and the growth path forward. So you could use tools and techniques, and there's various tools and techniques. Ram mentioned a few that you could use throughout the team coaching process. But Ram, I want to touch on this one point before we lose track, before the time passes. Team coaching doesn't always exist on its own. It is sometimes supported by other modalities, like team building. I think you made mention of that. Team building, supervision. And I can't think of more right now. Consulting process upfront, facilitation. So team coaching can be supported by other modalities. How effective have you seen that in organizations where you've had experiences?
Fundamentally, before that, very quickly, I'll address this. George has asked about what are the few common goals of the organization. That depends on the organization, George. I can't tell them what they want to achieve. It depends on the pain point. Just the other day before yesterday, or yesterday it was, Smita and I had a conversation with a company which is spun off from a very large company. We were addressing about 50, 60 people in a town hall meeting. And as we proceeded, it was like a kind of a satellite which has been set off from a mothership, and the satellite is feeling like an orphan. And so most of their issues were emotional rather than anything testing. So we don't know what it is. So what usually happens is that I would have a discussion with the CEO and the CHRO, who is going to be in charge of the whole thing in terms of what it is. We'll do a survey. And then based on that, the organization will determine some broad goals. But then when we start the work in the speed model, we allow them to envision their own, what is it that they want to achieve based on those goals of the company and to better those things. So I have no clue about what goals the company is going to achieve. I can't determine that. And I have no say in the matter. I can only facilitate in terms of discussion. Somebody asked about, Srini, about vulnerability of an individual in team coaching. That is what we try to encourage all the time. Allow people, create that safe space, which is why we say that all that you can do is to appreciate. There can not be anything which is negative, which is challenging or whatever. So one of the things I would tell the people is that after somebody has made a statement, please appreciate whatever it is. If you can't find anything to appreciate in what the person has said, okay, say that your hairstyle is good. You're wearing a nice new set of clothes or whatever it is, or your nails are well painted, whatever it may be, but make that person feel good genuinely. And so that's extremely important. And the more respected they feel, the more open they become, more authentic they become, the more vulnerable they become. So vulnerability is going to be a very key factor in creating that safe space. So that's going to be a critical factor. Coming back to what you said, Cindy, basically all OD principles are about these three circles interacting together: self, team, and the organization. Call it by whatever name. Some people call it self, it, and whatever, they, or something like that. Now, so the basic elements that support supervision, we are including in this because ICF in its wisdom has said that supervision has to be part of this. Fair enough. For coaches, it's important. But when you're actually doing team coaching, it's not very important. But in training of the coaches in terms of understanding what the principles are, I would like them to come back and tell us, hey, this is what I have done. And does it follow these competencies? And we'll use the 7 lenses of Peter Hawkins, the 7I model, and go through the supervision process. But what is important is in OD, for those of you who are familiar with OD, there's this concept called the use of self. So at the individual level, the coach who is there, as well as transferring on to the people who are in the team, are they emotionally intelligent? Are they vulnerable? Are they authentic? So are they bringing all those factors that they need to be in order for them to be part of the emotionally bonded team? And the coach himself, herself, are they ready? So that's an important part of it. So that sometimes requires individual coaching. And therefore, in team coaching, you have an element which is addressing that part of it. And of course, you are addressing the team coaching in a larger sense when you are addressing the team. The support, in my experience, comes from as much of information as we can get about the stakeholders, what the stakeholders want. The people with whom each of the team, if there are 12 people, who do they interact with? Each of them may be interacting with another 10 people internally, another 12 people externally. So there may be about 300, 400 viewpoints which are coming together. So how are they going to be synthesized? And how are they going to determine what is really high priority, what is impacting them more, et cetera, et cetera? And then how do they relate to the larger organizational goals that they have set for themselves? So it is in this total context of these three elements, the self, the team, and the larger organization, that we would try and get together. And pretty much all the ICF competencies come in that space as well, whether it is in terms of the agreement. In fact, the agreement takes a much longer time, as can be expected in a team effort, because multiple viewpoints are involved. But in that process of the agreement, can we create the rest of it, the trust, the presence, the inquiries, the limiting beliefs? Because even there, if you're asking the right questions and if you're putting them in the right space to ask questions, then you will find that many of the limiting beliefs start coming up there itself. And then the awareness starts happening. So it's not going to be as clearly defined as, okay, we have this agreement here, and we have the exploration here, and we have the awareness here, and we have the action here. All of that will start going together. And over 12 months, you will find some actions are taking place. There'll be some resultant reactions. So what awareness does it create, and how do you move forward? But believe you me, in all the work that I have done, and I'm not exaggerating here, every single company that I have worked with, they have come back and said, even when they are halfway through this, that the kind of shifts that they have seen has never happened elsewhere, with any kind of training, any kind of individual work, and so on. The systemic coaching works, absolutely.
Yeah. I have a similar experience where it's an extremely rewarding experience on all levels. The one thing I found with teams is that you got to put a fine comb or really be tuned into diversity in simple ways, like diversity of language, diversity of learning styles, how people give feedback. As a simple example, some with a loud voice and some in very soft ways, some with few words and some with multiple essays. So you've got to be in tune with diversity. Inclusion and belonging is crucial to high impact teams, creating a space for all to belong. So these concepts, play quite a significant role. We don't have much time to go into them, and I wish we could. We'll find some other ways. Ram would write a blog on it. Don't worry.
No, we can have another meeting if the audience wants. And I just want to address two things, Cindy. One is, like you said, this diversity kind of stuff. Right from the beginning, you start emphasizing respect for one another. It's not just empathy. It's more than that. It's respect for one another. And once that is drilled in, which is why this, appreciative inquiry, AI, is tremendous in that way, because I studied that for quite a while. And if you instill that in them, and I think that starts happening, the kind of appreciation, because all of diversity, management of diversity, is to respect other person's views. And as a coach, I always say that is a non-negotiable aspect of it. If you're not believing in it, don't be in the team. Get out of the team. It's as simple as that. And Nita had a question about how do you bring in the voices of stakeholders? Yeah, it's not possible to bring all the stakeholders, 250 people or 300 people in the room. So what we do is to ask those people who are there to go and consult other people as to what is it, what do they think about what the organizational objectives are, what are their viewpoints there? So you try and get as much information as you can. And sometimes you run also kind of visualization exercises. There's a very, very simple exercise. I divide them into 4 groups, call them by different names, one representing the customers, one representing the suppliers, one representing the, let's say, the employees, another representing the leaders, and they keep shifting. And there's an amazing kind of thing comes out when the people who are the employees, they move into employers and they start having to think about it from that perspective and come back with that. So even from themselves, by the time they put on different caps, there is some, I don't know, there's a famous theory about you wear a red cap and a black cap and a white cap and all that nonsense. So you start wearing different caps and positions and you can discover all this data. But basically the simplest way to do this, we give them assignments. Each one of you go and talk to 20 people, 10 within the company, 10 outside the company, and come back with answers to these questions that you are trying to address.
Yeah, absolutely. Ram, is there something that we're missing here that we should be covering? But before you answer that, I want to say, coaches, if you're interested in team coaching for the new credentialing, Cocharia has designed a special offer at a lower cost, because this is the first program we're running to meet the requirements of the team coaching. And you can speak to somebody at the office. Kiva will put some details up for you as to, you know, what your needs are and more about the program. Anything you want to say about it, Ram?
Essentially, in this particular program, which ICF says that you can join it if you have 60 hours of coach training already, which could be 60 or more, and then primarily on team coaching competencies. And huge number of people who are approaching us saying, we would like to get this ACTC certification. And over a period of time, ICM is going to start a separate one, which is independently self-standing program as well. But you have an opportunity, and we believe that this is really the future. Someone asked a question about what is the multiple ideas that are coming, how you to handle them. Basically, what I do is to put all of those ideas on whiteboards or flip charts or whatever it is, and then give them a break and say, okay, now you vote on it. And what are the top 10 that you want to discuss further? So that's one way. There are maybe other ways because you don't have the time, the luxury to deal with each of those ideas together.